Picture a young man standing outside a Naga village gate, unable to marry, unable to wear the shawl of a full adult, unable to sit among the elders as an equal. Then picture that same man returning from a raid, and everything about how the village sees him changing overnight. That was the reality across the hills of what is now Nagaland for centuries. Today we are going inside that world. For generations, several Naga tribes practice what outsiders came to call headhunting. The word alone tends to shut down curiosity. People hear it and picture nothing but savagery. But look closer, and you find something far more structured. Headhunting was not random violence. It was a deeply organized institution woven into marriage, farming, religion, art, and the entire architecture of village life. Anthropologist J.P. Mills lived among the Ao and Lota Naga in the early 20th century, and his field notes lay out just how far this institution reached. Taking a head was rarely a solo act of rage. It was usually a planned raid, sometimes involving days of preparation, omens read from birds or eggs, and rituals performed before the party even left the village. A failed raid was not just a military loss, it was read as a sign that the spirits had withheld their blessings. Success, on the other hand, transformed the man's entire position in society. He earned the right to specific tattoos across his chest, arms, and sometimes his face, patterns that varied from tribe to tribe and could never legally be worn by a man who had not taken a head. He gained the right to particular shawls woven with motifs reserved only for warriors who had proven themselves. In many communities, he became eligible for marriage in a way he simply was not before. A man without a head to his name could remain unmarried well into his life, regardless of his family's wealth or standing. Christoph von Fürer-Haimendorf, who worked extensively among the Konyak and Sema Naga, documented the sheer density of these symbols. Hornbill feathers worn only by proven warriors, specific bead necklaces, each strand carrying meaning, brass ornaments, cane armlets, particular styles of spears and dows that marked the man's history at a glance. Among the Konyak, some chiefs, known as Angs, ruled over villages where headhunting prowess was directly tied to political authority. A successful headhunter was not simply admired, he could become a leader others were expected to follow. The practice was closely tied to farming and fertility as much as it was to prestige. Among several tribes, a head brought back from the raid was believed to carry a kind of life force that could bless the coming harvest. Villages sometimes timed raids around the agricultural calendar, hoping to secure this force before planting season. This is part of why many raids targeted strangers with no personal grudge attached at all. The goal was not always revenge, often it was provision, a spiritual investment in the survival of the entire community, crops included. Ursula Graham Bower, a British anthropologist who lived among the Zami Naga through the 1930s and 40s, described how thoroughly this shaped a young man's path through life. There was, in many of these societies, no separate ladder to adulthood. Headhunting effectively was the ladder. A man's tattoos, his ornaments, his standing at feasts and councils, all of it traced back to what he had proven in the field. J. H. Hutton, who studied the Angami and Sema Naga in detail, recorded how villages themselves were built around the practice defensively as much as culturally. Naga villages were frequently perched on ridgelines and hilltops, surrounded by spiked bamboo fencing, stone walls, and narrow, deliberately confusing entrance paths designed to slow down an attacking party. Head-taking cut both ways. Every villages that sent out raiders also had to defend against being raided in turn. And this constant tension shaped where and how entire communities chose to live. Trophies themselves were treated with elaborate ceremonies rather than simply discarded or hidden. Among several tribes, heads were brought back to the village and placed at designated sites, sometimes a tree, a stone platform, or the base of a morung, the communal bachelor's house found in many Naga villages. Feasts followed, sometimes lasting days, with rice beers, drumming, and songs recounting the raid in detail. These were not private trophies, they were communal events witnessed and remembered by the entire village. The Morung itself deserves attention here, because it was where much of this culture was actively taught. Young unmarried men lived together in the Morung, and it functioned as a school for the skills a warrior needed. Elders passed down oral histories of past raids. Weapons were kept and maintained there. Songs and chants tied to headhunting were rehearsed there. A boy did not simply grow into this world by accident. He was trained into it, deliberately by the men who had come before him. Not every tribe practiced headhunting identically. Among the Angami, it was closely bound up with territorial disputes and village rivalries that could simmer for generations. Among the Konyak, it carried heavier ties to chieftainship and political power. Among the Ao, status and marriage eligibility were especially prominent. The common thread across all of them was that a head was never just a head. It was proof, publicly displayed and impossible to fake, of what a man had risked and what he had delivered for his community. The decline of this practice did not happen all at once. British colonial administration, extending into the Naga Hills through the 19th and early 20th century, imposed increasing restrictions and punitive expedition against Naga villages that continued raiding. Christian missionary activity followed close behind, reaching deep into the hills over the early and mid-20th century, and it reshaped village life from the inside, discouraging the rituals, songs, and ceremonies tied to the old warrior status system. By the mid-20th century, headhunting as an active practice had largely ended across the region, though the tattoos, songs, and oral histories tied to it survived far longer in memory than the raids themselves did in practice. What remains today are the artifacts and the accounts. Museums across Nagaland hold the shawls, ornaments, and the dows once carried into raids. Elders in some villages still recount the old stories, softened by generations of retelling, but still carrying the outline of the world where a man's word was measured in exactly this way. Charles Chassier, a Naga historian and a writer, had documented how communities across the region have worked to preserve this history, not to glorify the violence, but to understand a system that shaped identity, art, marriage, and leadership for centuries before it disappeared. Headhunting was, in the end, one of the most complete status systems ever built by a human society. It touched marriage, religion, farming, defense, education, and art all at once, and it did so without ambiguity. Everyone in the village knew exactly what a tattoo meant, exactly what a shawl meant, exactly what a man standing at a feast, adorned in the symbols of a proven warrior, had gone through to stand there. That clarity, that complete lack of pretending, is part of what makes this history worth understanding on its own terms, not just as a curiosity, but as one of the most fully developed systems of honor the world has seen. If you enjoyed this video, then please drop a like and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you on the next one.